On the very day that we assumed the mission from the unit we were replacing, we had a platoon that was ambushed and pinned down in the middle of the city, and by the Shia militia in that area, who we know from the intel reports on the backside, their goal was to pin that platoon down, kill everyone, drag U.S. soldiers through the streets on CNN to create a strategic victory in the information space. A similar style attack has happened during the Battle of Mogadishu. So it was that type of attack that was the enemy's intention. In our case, we were able to successfully launch a counterattack to go in and extract that platoon, and then that just kicked off what ended up being a year of nonstop fighting. I had the responsibility to run the mass casualty evacuation, as we had 8 soldiers killed and over.
Hey, let's welcome back Trent Upton. Second appearance on the show. He's a U.S. Army colonel with over 29 years of service. He's a combat veteran, culminating as the Chief of Staff of U.S. Army Public Affairs, and currently pivoting to his next chapter. Welcome to the show, sir, and good to see you back here.
Hey, Danny, thanks. Hey, it's great to be here, and I'm really happy to have had the opportunity to come back on with you and, in my mind, redeem my first episode where I was thought I had a lot of room to grow. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And the podcast has grown significantly since that, and I have also learned a lot. So we're all trying to improve here. So I appreciate your time today, and let's maybe focus on some parts of your career and your advice that we didn't have a chance to explore in depth the last time. So maybe if you want to talk about your journey through the Army, maybe in times of friction, something that you want to share with the public and some insights that you have in mind.
Yeah. So hey, great. So first, kind of a little bit of refresh. Joined the Army as an infantry officer, really to do the purpose of the infantry, close with and destroy the enemies of my country. Joined for the purpose, stayed for the people, and kept doing it for both. And really, my service and career has taken me around the world, and then some. And then really, it's been both a personal and professional journey for me in terms of leadership, life, even love, because I think it's all the same. I like to say that I've learned most of my lessons in war, and that's whether it comes down to lessons that have helped me in terms of being a better leader, living better, or even just how I interact with people, and even the area of love, because I would argue that the best leaders lead with love. Love is the ultimate discipline, and it's all about how you can impart that in a legal, moral, ethical way to build that cohesion amongst a formation of soldiers, especially when you're preparing them and leading them in harm's way in service to this country. But, I think that some of the big things that were formative for me besides my military service actually started before my military service. And I think that, as we talk about these things out in the internet information space and these narratives that are out there, I think it's important that everyone kind of take into context of how it applies to them. What I mean by that is there's a lot of things that in retrospect I already had inside me, the Army just magnified, especially leadership ability. Looking back on it and talking to some of my old friends, I really had already had a lot of formative experiences growing up through my childhood on the farm, playing sports as a teenager, as examples that really set the stage for developing me just as a person and a leader, to include having, I would argue, a little more identity than most people before I joined the Army, because I didn't even start. The Army wasn't my first choice. I wandered into it. It was almost like a calling after drifting in college for a while. But when I got into it, it resonated clearly. I think that the Army, that context, just magnified a lot of things that were already there. And as I like to say, there's kind of a misnomer. The uniform doesn't make the man makes the uniform. And I've learned that coming full circle after almost 30 years of service. It's everything starts with what is inside you. You can't lead anyone until you learn how to lead yourself. You can't really live until you figure out how to live as a person. You can't love anybody until you figure out how to love yourself. So that's my kind of lead in as a very much an internal locus of control kind of guy.
Yeah, and you talked about this calling that you had, and how much the army resonated with you once you joined and served. And as you said, having that internal compass is very important to lead other people, whether it's in the combat or maybe even your family. A young person find that calling or whatever resonates with them so much, because you said that you went to college, you didn't really feel like it was the right path. But how do young people can find that the right thing to do for them specifically?
Yeah, great. My first piece of advice is turn off the noise. Get off social media, get off the internet, develop what I call the art of not listening. There is so much out there right now. And so, if you're utilizing TikTok as your information source, I'd argue that you need to get away from the influencers. Now, some are better than others, but I remember about 10 years ago, there's an article came out, talked about the death of expertise. And that I think has been the unintentional consequence of some of the goodness that's come with the explosion of the information space, is that there's so many voices out there. A lot of times people just gravitate to the loudest person in a room, which isn't necessarily not the right source. So I think a lot of it is getting away from all that. I had some distinct advantages now looking back on it. I grew up on the farm. I spent a lot of time alone. I spent a lot of time just with myself, where I didn't know it at the time, but I built a lot of introspection even at a young age, just based off, things that people would say to me back then. And I think that only helped me later on, um, to be able to form my own opinions, think for myself, assess, and it's the art of not listening. It takes time to discern what advice is good and who you should be listening to. The Army kind of makes it easy for us, right? Because you have a commander, everybody's got a boss. I think it's probably to some degree every place else in the world, right? But you have a clear chain of command, you know who's in charge, and there's already that inherent authority that you learn to listen to. And so that's an advantage I think that many of us who served have had, is that to help you over time, you form your own opinions, you form your own style of leadership, etc.
Yeah, so turn off your phone. Try to have this period of time where, you don't have a lot of noise either coming from social media or internet, or maybe even the wrong people who might lead you to the wrong way. And it's interesting that, your experience back in the day before we had X, Twitter, and then TikTok and anything else, man, you had more time to actually reflect and think about things that you want to do. That's an interesting advice. Part of this problem of the information that we have on social media is it can also be misleading. And in terms of, the military service, the army, you can see so much content about special operations and all of these cool guys on those missions and so on. But as we talked a little bit offline, most of the people in the US Army, or maybe in armed forces in general, are in special forces. So do you want to speak to this, to the difference between what people mostly see on the internet versus what really happens when you serve in the army or in the US military in general?
Yeah, sure. So due respect. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are, have served in the special operations, and great respect for them, and I think that a lot of them are out there now on various platforms really doing a lot of great work in terms of closing some gaps in understanding between those of us who served and the general population. I think that it also kind of gives some maybe a different perspective, which is valuable, but it's also important to understand that that's just, that is a specialized, specific segment of the overall military. We fought a war for almost 20 years. And while everybody had a role to play, and special operations certainly had a role to play, and I've had my time to coordinate a lot of operations with the special operations community, but there's a whole lot of people out there that have served in the conventional force that I'm looking forward to, and I think it's starting to grow now, where vets are getting out there and telling their stories. Because I know I have personally witnessed, otherwise ordinary Americans in uniform who did extraordinary things. I mean, things that you, well, have actually written books about and miniseries about and movies about. So there's a lot. The military army is a team of teams. Everybody's got a role to play, and I am hopeful that over time that more and more of the veteran community will get out there and tell their stories, because I think they need to be heard, especially now, just given the current environment.
Yeah, so why don't you share some of your stories there to, to kind of open eyes for the public of, what you
Yeah.
actually did as a combat veteran in the conventional army.
Okay. Yeah. So here's the thing about war stories. I know you really had to convince me, because the thing about war stories, my opinion, is someone's always got a better one. All right, this is how it is when you get a bunch of us together. But I'll share a couple and really try to weave this into being instructive at placing context from a leadership standpoint. So I'll talk first about my most formative combat experience, which was my first deployment in 2004 in Iraq. So ironically, we thought we were going to go in during the initial push and liberation. That got delayed just due to the success of the forces we had on the ground there and our deployment. I was a First Cavalry Division at the time, stationed out of Fort Hood, Texas. Our flow in got delayed for about a year, and I'll always remember we were watching TV. The war had kicked off, and we saw on TV that morning, I believe it was the Marines pulling down Saddam's statue. And my friends and I looked at each other like, damn it, we missed it. I mean, because look, we're in the infantry. I mean, that's what we joined to do, to go to the show, right? And so we missed it. Little did we know, right? It was just beginning, the irony. But you fast forward a year, '04, where we deploy into Iraq. My battalion, 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry Regiment, went into the Sadr City district of Baghdad, Iraq, which is a 6 by 8 kilometer Shia slum, always repressed by the Saddam regime, but it was also populated with about 2.5 million people at the time. On the very day that we assumed the mission from the unit we were replacing, we had a platoon that was ambushed and pinned down in the middle of the city, and by the Shia militia in that area, who we know from the intel reports on the backside, their goal was to pin that platoon down, kill everyone, drag U.S. soldiers through the streets on CNN to create a strategic victory in the information space. A similar style attack has happened during the Battle of Mogadishu, which ironically, the anniversary of that fight in Mogadishu that was highlighted in the movie and book Black Hawk Down just occurred earlier this month. So it was that type of attack that was the enemy's intention. In our case, we were able to successfully launch a counterattack to go in and extract that platoon, and then subsequently that just kicked off what ended up being pretty much a year of nonstop fighting. I was not in company command yet. I was the personnel officer for the battalion, and at that point, I had the responsibility to run the mass casualty evacuation, as we had 8 soldiers killed and over 50 wounded. I say over 50 because there were actually more soldiers who were, caught some shrapnel, etc. After you see your buddy who is dead or seriously wounded, those guys didn't care about that Purple Heart. I mean, that just gives you an idea of that bond of brotherhood between soldiers. They just wanted to stay in the fight. So that was the very first day of combat for me and a whole lot of us. And then from that, you fast forward, I would later assume command of the company and the battalion, and charged with really helping that company recover from a lot of casualties that they had taken starting on 4 April. And then after that, just given the effects of of losing their buddies that had on the floor. So I went into that, and this was before we had all these things like additional combat stress control teams and everything when we were downrange to help soldiers work through operational stress issues, etc. And it was just me and my leaders trying to figure out, okay, how do we lead this formation through it? And it really just came down to my part as a company commander was just being visible. My first sergeant told me, They just need to see you. They need to see you out there taking the same risk as they are. And that really led me to there. And that was really what got the entire battalion through a really uh, heavy combat tour, was starting with our leadership at the top all the way down. It was being visible. It was leading by example and being places on the battlefield that by Army doctrine, we had no business being. But in stress, soldiers need to see their leaders. They need to see them out there. That was at that point, that was the only thing I knew to do. And then I think the first challenge that I had upon assuming company command was when we lost our first soldier. And as was the standard practice at the time, the technique is, after we go through the memorial ceremony, in there, I'm talking with the formation and kick all the soldiers out, keep the leaders in there. And I'm just talking to leaders about, how we overcome, how we help lead through the formation after, having the most recent killed in action event soldier that we lost after already losing losing. And one of the NCOs at the time said, hey sir, what do we do tomorrow if guys are like not wanting to go on a patrol or anything? And I said, hey, look, I thought about it for a minute. I thought about where they'd been at and where their morale was at, etc. And I said, hey, look, everybody's got to fight. We need everybody. We got to keep everybody in the fight. Now, some of them that's a pat on the back. Some of them that's a kick in the butt, figuratively. We got to get personal with our personnel, and we just have to lead them through it. And that might seem a little counterintuitive for those that have not been there, done that. But that was exactly what they needed to hear. Because after that, a squad leader came up to me and said, hey, sir, thank God you said that. That's exactly what we needed to hear. Somebody just needed to stand up and say, we got to keep pushing forward. And so that was the initial thing that initially informed my idea of leadership, of sometimes you got to be the leader that they need you to be, not necessarily the one that, that you might think in that situation, you might think you want to go, you want to go on the soft side and say, hey, look, let's give them, like, that's not what they needed. They needed somebody to stand up and say, no, we're going to hold the line and we're going to fight. Now I say that there's other places, especially in that tour, where I'd spent more time listening to a soldier who's trying to process trauma probably than a lot of guys you're going to meet. But that was the only thing I knew how to do at the time. Guess what? Everybody else started following my lead. And that's how we got that company through what ended up being a year of almost nonstop combat.
Yeah, a pretty intense story there. How do you think this translates into the civilian world and corporate America? Obviously, you don't, lose people. You don't have insurgents who try to kill everyone and so on. But there is still a good chunk of parallels where, you might change their jobs and you lost a key player on your team, or you have deadlines, or you have uncertainty. How can people apply your leadership lessons into their civilian roles from these kinds of stories?
Yeah. So, I mean, adversity is adversity to some degree. It's just differences of scale and magnitude, right? I think that's one of the advantages that, those of us who've been through the high end of the human experience, I would argue, is war. There's nothing higher than that. If somebody thinks there is, I'd like to talk with them. But from what I mean by that is, during war, you experience the full range of human emotions, and you see the full range of humanity, both good and bad. And as I also like to say, after combat, the rest of life has the volume turned down. But that having been said, it really gets into leadership is all about people, and you lead people, you manage things. And so I think that, and I've seen it even here, non-attributional in the Army, you have leaders that some are better than others, some are more people-centric. The more people-centric leaders are the best leaders. End of story. So if you're in a leadership position, heck, I suspect there's probably people that are out there in leadership positions that don't even like people. They like other things. They like doing things, or they like systems or whatever. Hey, to each their own. But the best leaders, I would argue, are those who, connect with people, care about people, are all about people connection and impact. Because at the end of the day, you you can talk about the technology and, everybody's got their opinions on what AI is going to do, but you need people. You need people to get the job done no matter what. So I think it is that ability to connect with people, listen to people. You'd be surprised too. People, most people get their information about the military from like watching movies. I would say that my experience has been both personal style and everybody that I've served with is that you want to talk about collaboration, listening, team effort. I, that's what we do. That's how we lead. It's not, if you're talking about someone who came in the Army, initial term of enlistment as example, and everybody's service is important, that they're going to have that perspective of more of a direct leadership style. You get to where I am, you got to know how to do it all. Direct, indirect, collaborative, consensus building, you know, tactical, operational, strategic level leadership. So, that I'd say that we are very skilled at that. People talk about scaling. We call that like task organization, combat power build. We know how to scale. There's some things how we're structured that in such a way and standard operating procedures that enable you to scale. But we scale up, we scale down every day. We know how to transform. I mean, the Army's always transforming. So we like to say currently it's transforming in contact. We're always transforming in contact because we are always in some type of, the Army's always in some type of contact with adversaries, even if that's just, in the information space. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, great insights. We talked a little bit about friction before the show. Do you want to discuss that a little bit? What it's like to lead in friction, and what's your experience with that?
Yeah. So friction is like my views on adaptation. It all comes down to preparation. The more time you invest as a leader in preparing for friction and really doing an analysis and assessment of the current situations in the environment always to help anticipate where friction points may exist and then having at least a thought of how you can address that friction, I think is foundational. And that way, you might not be totally anticipating something, but I don't know that you're ever really caught off guard. If you do encounter friction, is really, you encounter the friction, you assess what's going on, and then you determine various courses of actions or options to address that friction. And then, with the appropriate level, you make a decision on what avenue that you're going to pursue to address it, mitigate it moving forward. So I think, I'm lucky, as are a lot of others that have served, that especially those that have, moved up into the ranks that I have over my career. I mean, you spend a lot of time being taught how to do that. And then more importantly, you spend a lot of time learning how to do that, because some things cannot be taught. They can only be learned through experience and repetition.
And as we're wrapping up the episode, do you have final word or something that you want to share with listeners? It could be, emphasizing something that we talked about, or maybe bring in another point that you didn't have a chance to share yet.
Yeah, just where I am in time and space, and the constant that constant talk about veterans and transition and all of the noise that's out there in the information environment, especially on LinkedIn. A lot of noise on LinkedIn, man. So I just say that, the thing that I've stayed attuned to is, okay, take it for what it is, make your own assessment on what is the right fit for you. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges most folks have, is they're looking in terms of, I don't even like to use the term transition anymore. It's really transformation or pivoting. Nobody really retires anymore. Who's that? My dad's in his 90s. He's still working. So, I think that it gets into, you got to discern what's the right fit for you. And I think that there is a lot of unhelpful noise out there in terms of those narratives, kind of a one size fits all, which I think that that's a big thing that people have to overcome, especially, I think it's incumbent on the veteran, but also the broader community of like not putting people in a box. Don't assume that just that, like I said, that this guy, that these certain qualities, this whole thing of, well, you serve, so you're going to make scream and yell at everybody. No, but I think that's just one evident example out there from when I engage with people. But I think there's also a lot of goodness, and I'm looking forward to reading Brian Cook's book, Set Your Table. I know you had him on; he's a friend of mine. I have some similar views as his. Is there's a lot of advantages that we have as we come in, as we shift to do something else that I don't think we talk about enough. So, for example, I'm doing it just to learn, but right now I'm studying for my PMP certification. That stuff is all the same. Project management, portfolio management. I've been doing that for 20 years. The frameworks are the same. The words are different. It's just learning the different terminology. That's an example. Marketing, same principles apply to, doing planning for fire support or for like information operations, etc. It's the same stuff. The words are just different. And so it's just learning to, learning that and leveraging what you know how to do. I mean, somebody asked me the other day about precision operations. Well, it doesn't play well to tell them that I'm able to execute very, operations to a high degree of precision because I've run so many airstrikes. That doesn't really play well, right? But that's the foundation. You want to talk about precision. I mean, that's how I learned how to do that stuff. But it's really changing. I'm not going out to do airstrikes. No, everybody calm down. But it's really just saying, okay, I know how to do this. How do I apply this in a different context with different intention and different outcome? And I think that that's been helpful for me. I'm sharing that because, with hopes that it's helpful to other folks out there that are looking to, or they're soon to pivot to something else. But I'm really excited. I mean, you can feel how you want to feel, choose your attitude type of thing. I'm really excited because a lot of irons in the fire right now. A lot of people that, in spite of some of the things on LinkedIn, right, they say, well, there's no job for leaders. Leader is not a job position. Well, okay. Well, first off, I'm not looking for a job. I'm looking for a place to make impact. And then surprisingly, as opposed to the noise on LinkedIn, everyone who's pulsed me thus far, and there's been I got a lot of irons in the fire right now that I'm grateful for. It has been, I'll talk a little bit about some technical stuff, and it always circles back to, no. We want you to lead. That's what we need. And so, it's not all this doom and gloom catastrophizing that I see out on the information space. And the other thing that makes me hopeful is I think we're on the cusp of a real growth, as I try to be Nostradamus here, is with veteran leadership, veteran business, small business entrepreneurship, I think is on the rise. I think that folks are recognizing the power within themselves to work together, and as the network of veterans, I think you're starting to see that more and more. And I think it's only going to grow. And it really gets into who's going to take advantage of that wealth of knowledge and not technical and leadership abilities of the global war on terror veteran generation. So I think the people who the firms that take advantage of that are going to flourish. And I think that, failing in that, I see this generation doing it on their own. And I think you're going to see that more and more out in the business environment in a couple of years. I could be wrong, but, that's what I'm betting a Diet Coke on with you, Danny.
Yeah, and I had the chance to interview a lot of people like you who have tremendous experience in the military, and it's quite evident how it can easily, a big part of it can be easily applied to the civilian sector. And I encourage the listeners to check out some of the other podcasts with the veterans and to actually hear some of that practical advice, and from those who actually retired from the service. They took a few years and now they running big businesses or serve on the board of directors of these companies or doing other great things. So there's definitely a lot of value in that. But thank you, Trent, for sharing your story and all of this advice. Good luck with your future endeavors. And I'm definitely looking forward to another episode, maybe once you get closer to that transition, or maybe once you have some experience and you want to share, or maybe just explore some other war stories that you had in mind and that you want to share. Amazing stuff. Thank you for your time today. And I'm definitely looking forward to the part 3.
Hey, thanks, Danny. Had a lot of fun, and yeah, look forward to continuing the conversation.
Awesome.